Okay. Well, good evening, everybody, and we're ready for week 8 or lesson 8 of 9. So we have tonight, and then we have next week, and that'll be it. Tonight will be the last night of grammar, and the next week will be tools, apps, books, websites, that sort of thing, as to where do we go from here? What's the next steps? Depends on whatever everybody wants to do. So anyway, we'll go ahead and get started. We'll start with prayer, and then we'll jump into the lesson. Father, we're thankful for your word and the fact that you have communicated with us and let us know like your word says, your testimonies. You have your testimonies on what it is that you've done, and you have your precepts and your guides to living, and then you have your laws, your commands, your statutes. And all these things you've revealed to us through your word, and we are thankful for your word. It's our desire to understand what you want us to do, and that we would be found doing that and be faithful to you. So we ask your blessing on your word and on our time together tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, week 8. So, surprise, surprise, we're going to review the alphabet, we're going to review the diphthongs, then we'll look at participles and infinitives. This is the last lesson for grammar, and so that'll finish off what we're going to look at. Participles and infinitives. We'll do some reading from John 1. Hopefully everybody's getting familiar and getting used to the pronunciations and such. And then, of course, we'll have insights and questions at the end. So let's start off with the alphabet. We have, as you've seen before, all the first and last letter, and all the others are missing. So we'll go ahead and go through these. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, xi, omicron, pi, rho, sigma, tau, upsilon, phi, chi, psi, and omega. And of course, it's always good to have them memorized in sequence, because if you ever look in a lexicon, you're looking actually at a book and not looking it up, by tapping it on a screen or something, or clicking on the screen. It's good to be able to find your way around. I actually have an app. Sometimes I'll tap on it and it'll send me to the wrong word, but fortunately I know the alphabet, so I know which way I have to scroll, and I'll scroll up or down to actually get to the word I want. So even though I'm tapping on it, sometimes it's good to know which way to go, and to know the alphabet gives you that. So that's why it's important. And it's also important to recognize them otherwise too. So we have alpha, kappa, eta, gamma, iota, omicron, xi, delta, mu, lambda, tau, epsilon, pi, sigma, rho, omega, phi, nu, psi, upsilon, zeta, beta, theta, chi. Okay, very good. You're all doing well. And then we have the diphthongs. Alpha, iota, as in, or sounds like, I, as in aisle. And epsilon iota sounds like A, as in 8 or weight. Mm-hmm. Omicron iota sounds like oi, as in oil or foil. Upsilon iota, we, as in sweet. We were driving someplace the other day and saw some place. There was an inn where you can spend the night, and the suite, the T and the E were burned out on it this night, so all you see was suey. But yeah, we as in sweet. Okay, alpha upsilon, ow as in sauerkraut. Epsilon upsilon, U as in feud. And omicron upsilon, U as in through. Very good. You guys are doing well. Yeah, just for fun, this is December, and I've already watched a couple of different Christmas Carol movies so far. I have a collection of those things, and so here we have Scrooge is paid a visit by the ghost of Christmas past participle. And so past participle is have been, and then have been bad, and then very is the adjective that modifies bad. So anyway, it scares him. No, not sentence diagrams. That's pretty scary stuff. So, ghost of Christmas past participle. And then we get a really complex one. I am the ghost of Christmas future imperfect conditional, said the Spirit. I bring news of what would have been going to happen if you were not to have been going to change your ways. We won't be looking at anything nearly that difficult this evening as we look at participles. Participles are verbal adjectives. Verbal adjectives. We're going to be looking at infinitives in a little bit, and that's a verbal noun. But right now we're looking at verbal adjectives. We have two participles in English. We have a present participle, and they almost always end with ing. And we use it, running, swimming, studying, or just being. Participles we don't want to confuse them with English gerunds. Gerunds are verbs that act as nouns, as in seeing is believing. In Greek, there is no gerund. In Hebrew, there's no gerund either. I think in both Greek and Hebrew, if they were trying to communicate the seeing is believing, they would actually use infinitives and say, to see is to believe. So we can certainly translate Greek and Hebrew into English gerunds if it sounds good, if it makes good sense, in the English language, but you don't have those in Greek and Hebrew. But oftentimes a gerund will end with the ing also. And then we have past participles, gone and been. That's what we had with the ghost of Christmas past participle. You have been bad. So we have been here as one of the past participles. And then passive participles in English often end with ed, as in moved to tears. She left the room. Participles can be used as an adjective. As we said, they're verbal adjectives. So they have a verbal piece and they have an adjective piece. And so they can be used as an adjective, as in the sleeping giant. Which giant? It's the one that's sleeping. That's an adjective. It tells us which giant, but it's actually a participle. The sleeping giant. Participles can also be used to predicate something. Predicate something is to tell us something about it, just like an adjective. In the same way we say the giant is sleeping. We have to add, in English, we have the to be verb, is, to make it fit, and then sleeping, of course, is the participle. And it can be substantival, which means that it takes the place of a noun, just like an adjective. Again, participle is a verbal adjective, so it can be used as in an attributive sense, in a predicate sense, and also as a noun. So we would normally say something like the one sleeping. The one sleeping would be a substantival use of a participle. Or, right. In a sentence like, while eating, he saw her. English requires the he. It's the closest one to the participle, and so he is the one, we would understand, he is the one eating. While eating, he saw her. And so her is going to be the direct object. English requires he as the one eating, since he's closer to the word. If the sentence were, he saw her while eating, then she is doing the eating. The eating is, the participle is closest to, well, it's kind of sloppy looking. It's closest to her, not he. So this would be the subject. He saw, verb, her while eating. So she's the direct object and is while she was eating. So as we've seen in the past lessons, the word order in English is critical. Dangling participles, you've probably heard of those, maybe you remember what they are, but that's when you have a participle that modifies a noun that either is not there at all or it's not the right one. And so I have some examples of that. Some of them I think are kind of funny, entertaining. After rotting in the cellar for weeks, my brother brought up some apples. Well, brother is the closest one to the participle, so the brother is the one rotting in English grammar. So the brother is downstairs in the cellar for weeks rotting, and then he brought up some apples. When it's pretty obvious from the context that what they meant was that the apples were the ones rotting, but that's the farthest one away, and so that's, that's what they call a dangling participle. Caution, pedestrian slippery when wet. You get a pedestrian out there, and if it's raining, you just can't hardly grab them. It's like a grease pig, pedestrians. So that's what it says, because when we have when wet, slippery when wet, that's referring to the pedestrians. What it means is that either the street is slippery, it's a caution sign to the pedestrians telling them that the street or the sidewalk or something is wet and slippery. And so it's, again, a dangling participle. It misdirects you to the right noun. Then a quote from Shakespeare, no less. Sleeping in my orchard, a serpent stung me. Those sleeping serpents you got to watch out for. Obviously, it's supposed to be me as the one who was sleeping, and while I was sleeping, the serpent stung me. So, backpacking in the woods, our dog ran off. I think a lot of dogs should just go out backpacking, get away from things, take some vacation, enjoy nature, and dogs don't. Obviously, the person's not even here. It should be like, while we were backpacking in the woods, our dog ran off. And so, we don't have the noun being modified by backpacking. Her big nose pointing into the sky, she missed her airplane. Well, we would presume that the big nose pointing into the sky is the airplane lifting off the runway, not the woman who missed her. It could be, I don't know. Who had the big nose, but I think it's another misdirection here. So dangling participles, we want to try to avoid those. And this is an English review, not a Greek review. I don't think there is such a thing as a dangling participle in Greek because Greek is inflected. As you may have suspected, while in English we depend a lot on word order to understand it for sure, in Greek it is all handled through inflection. And the participle is really, it's kind of a complex part of Greek grammar, and it is a really common one. It's really common to, especially seems like when I was reading through Peter, 1 Peter, 2 Peter, it just seems like he's got way more participles than verbs. Now, I don't know that to be a fact. It just seemed like that when I was reading through it, but I didn't count them or anything like to know for sure. But participles are very common and very heavily used in Greek. The participles are one of Greek's most distinguishing characteristics. In our notes, there's an example of kind of how Greek participles are used, but this is in English, kind of an English example of Greek participles on page 27, halfway down the page. Already having noticed, okay, there's a participle, the handsome young man, and wondering, there's another participle, who he was, and if he had noticed her, and having had her plans to sign up for Greek, okay, having had is another participle. So I'll just read it. I'm going to quit pointing them out. This is just chock full of participles. And having had her plans to sign up for Greek in order to sit near him, foiled by his signing up for Hebrew, and although she thought her chances were finished with him because he embarrassed her by catching her in her curlers on Saturday morning, she was surprised when he stopped to ask if he could escort her to the freshman mixer, the start of something which she hoped would last until death do them part. Okay. The only real verb in that, the main verb in that, is this phrase, she was surprised. So was would be the verb. She was surprised when he stopped. Everything else around it is a participle inclusion of the story, but not the main thought of the verb. The Greek participle, like English, is also a verbal adjective. They behave the same way. They have some characteristics. Greek participles share characteristics of both verbs and adjectives. As an So this is the adjective side of it. It is inflected for all three of these characteristics, and therefore if you have different groups, like you might have a person and a crowd, or more than 2 or 3 sets of individuals and something's going on and a participle is used, how do you know which one is doing it? Well, it's going to agree with the noun in case, gender, number. And so if it's a matter of singular or plural, then you can tell which one it's tying to, which is why I said I don't think you have a dangling participle in Greek, is because it's always going to be tied together by inflections. Case, again, tells you how it's being used in the sentence. Gender is going to be masculine, feminine, or neuter. And of course, number is going to be singular or plural. There is no vocative, and so when it comes to cases, we're just talking about nominative, genitive, dative, and accusative. No vocative for participles. The case, gender, number will tie the participle to the noun being modified, and we talked about that, which you can tell which one it is. As a verb, the participle, so this is as an adjective, and then as a verb, it has tense and voice. Those are the only two. Tense and voice. And tense, as you remember, is going to be a type of action. Tense only means time in the indicative mood in Greek. All the other situations are subjunctive and optative, a participle, an infinitive, those aren't moods, but they're still included with that. An imperative is a mood. In all those cases, tense does not mean time. It means type of action. It always means type of action, even in the indicative, but only in the indicative does it mean when, the time. So in a case of a participle, and it comes to tense, it's only going to mean type of action. And then voice is the same, middle, passive, active, middle, and passive. Since the indicative moves in the only place where time when is relevant, tense, relevant and tense, the participle tense does not carry notion of time when. However, participles do designate a relative time, and that's relative to the main verb. And so sometimes we will see something and say while speaking or after speaking, and we'll look at some examples of that here in just a little bit. So it's relative. The only time in a participle is relative to the main verb. Since time when is not a part of the participle and the main point of the tense is type of action, there are fewer tenses for participles. We only need a tense to cover each type of action. The what we call the imperfective, we use that term, I won't be using it this time, but it means continuous action. We have perfective action, which is undefined, and then we have perfective action, which is a completed action with an ongoing effect or state. And so we only need 3 tenses to cover those. So the present participle represents, or some people call it imperfective, because that's the type of action. It represents continuous action, and so that's when we might insert the word while we're translating. When we're translating, we'd say while speaking. But the aorist participle indicates undefined action occurring prior to the main verb, and so we would say after speaking. The perfect participle represents completed or perfective, which means a completed action, ongoing state, or effect. Fact is, the perfect participle is the only one where we know that it's actually a completed action, because the undefined doesn't really tell us, and present is continual action, and so the only way we know it's actually a completed action is if it's perfect, because it's going to be completed with an ongoing effect. And all 3 of these tenses, present, aorist, and perfect, all have active, middle, and passive voices. Active is the subject's doing it. Passive, it's happening to the subject, and middle is the subject acting upon or on behalf of itself. And some of these, when it comes to translating into English, some of these are hard to communicate, the type of action. You can say, well, continually, or something, and try to indicate this continuous type of action, but it doesn't always make for good English. So this is another place where it's an advantage to know Greek, to know about this, because you can figure out then what type of action, even if it doesn't show up too much in the translation. There is a future participle, but I didn't have it as one of the main ones because it only occurs 12 times in the New Testament. It's just used to describe what is proposed, intended, or expected in the future. And I have listed all 12 of the verses on the bottom of page 27, or well, next to the last paragraph there. But they're very rare, probably not worth going into in this class. It's beyond the scope of this class. Okay, Greek participles. As an adjective, participle can modify a noun. This is just like we had the English examples. We have the consuming fire. This is like an adjective here. It's a participle, but it's acting as an adjective. What kind of fire? The consuming fire. It can act as a substantive, as a noun, would be the one who consumes or the one that consumes or something like that. It's taking the place of a noun. The attributive use of the participle requires the definite article, which is exactly like we saw when we were looking at adjectives. And so here we have an article, and we have the phenomenou asteros. Do you know who Fred Astaire is? If there's younger people who are watching this on YouTube, they may not know who Fred Astaire is, but if you remember Fred Astaire was a star, then when you see Asteros, you can go, oh, okay, a star. So, I don't know if that helps, but anyway, what kind of star? It's the shining one. There's the participle. It's just telling us something about the star. What kind of star? That's from Matthew 2:7. John 4:11, we have the water, the living. And of course we saw this when we looked at adjectives too. That's how you say the living water. What kind of water? The living water. Mark 6:44. Here's the subject. We have the ones eating. Actually, it's all of this. The ones eating the breads, or the ones eating the loaves. And here's the verb over here. They were 5,000 men. But here we have, this is a participle, hoi phagantes. And so it's standing in the place of a noun. It's the subject of a sentence, even though it's a participle. So, again, it's a verbal adjective. It acts like an adjective. It does all the things an adjective can do. Adverbial. As an adverbial participle, it can act as a predicate. Instead of saying the consuming fire, it's telling us something about the fire. The fire is, and we often, when we use the predicate form of the participle, we often have to include a helping word, a to-be verb or something like that. The fire is consuming. You know, we looked at the tall man, or the man is tall. Is it describing the man, or is it asserting something about the man? Remember that example? This is kind of the same thing, except we're looking at participles. Adverbial participles are always anarthrous. Anarthrous means that doesn't have an article. If it's anarthrous, it doesn't have an article. If it's the word escapes me. Never mind. I'll think of it here in a little bit. So we don't see an article. There's no article over here, but we have tremusa, Aelphin. This would be she came, and we only know this is either he, she, or it because of the N ending here, but from the context we know it's she. She came, and it tells us how she came. She came trembling. But this is a verb, she came, and this is modifying the verb. So this is an adverbial form of a participle. How she came. And then we have the participle, chairontes, which is rejoicing. And we have they went, here's the they, and they went. They went rejoicing. That's how they went. So again, we have a verb, rejoicing, going, going, and then the participle is how they went, rejoicing. As you would expect, the use of Greek participles are identified by their inflection, and then the way they're formed, how do you recognize them? We don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but notice that we have, like luo, we often use luo as an example. It means I loose, or it could be I destroy. We have a connecting vowel, but then we have this morpheme here that identifies it as a participle, and then we have the same type of ending as a noun. This will be a third declension noun ending, which we didn't really look at third declension, but when you learn these things, it stands out a little bit more. So that's the present, and then for the aorist, we have the tense infix, or the tense formative, sigma alpha, and then we still have the noon tau, just like we did up here with the present. We got one here to tell us that it's a participle, and then we still have the noun type ending at the end. And then the perfect, we have the kappa and an omicron tau. But anyway, that's how you can tell. So the first one is a while loosing, it's present tense, and then maybe after loosing, while loosing, after loosing, and then having loosed, because that's trying to indicate a completed action with an ongoing state. This is perfect. So those are the way that you can tell. It's all part of the inflection. You don't have to memorize this. You don't have to be sweat this by any means. We just want to know that that's how it does it. It does it all by inflections, and everything is packed into it. The case, gender, number, the tense, and the voice are all packed into the word itself without any other helping words. Greek participles can have accompanying parts of speech like an article, an adjective, or a preposition. They really are very flexible. Greek participles are more specific than English participles. Greek participle tense is all about the type of action. And there are over a dozen uses for the verbal participles. But that's more than what we need to go into. There's only actually about, no, I'm thinking of infinitives, never mind. So anyway, there are a number of uses, but that's beyond the scope of this class to go into the details of how that happens. Suffice it to say, as we've seen with adjectives, pronouns, and prepositions, you have to look at the words around the participle to see what's there. Does it have an article or does it not? And is there a noun that is modifying? Does it match in gender number, case gender number with anything? You have to look, see what else is there to see how it should be translated. Now, that's all we're going to talk about for participles. That's a big subject. There's, like I say, heavy usage in the New Testament. But if you can just remember it's a verbal adjective, then you'll be doing well. You'll be doing well, because then you can know that there's a verbal part of it and there's an adjectival part of it. Infinitive is actually a verbal noun. It makes a noun out of a verb. It takes a verb and the verb becomes a noun. It's easy to recognize in English because it's preceded by the word to. So a sample as a subject, using an infinitive as a subject, to study Greek is my goal. To study Greek is my goal. As an object, we have I would be the subject, learned would be the verb, and then to swim would be the infinitive. So really easy to find these in English. To live is Christ, and to die is gain. We'll look at this. We'll look at this verse in a little bit more detail later. The Greek infinitive has the same use as English, but as you may suspect, is capable of a wide range of use. About 13 uses, and 6 of those. That's about tied that up to the other one. 6 of them are fairly common. Like a verb, it has tense and voice, but no mood, no person, no number. However, it is often viewed as a neuter singular. Sometimes it'll have an article, and it'll be a neuter singular article to go with it. It can stand as a noun. It can be articular. That's the word I was trying to think of a minute ago. Articular means it has the article. Anarthrous means it doesn't have the article. And we can determine the case by the definite article. When the article shows up, then we know, is it nominative, is it genitive, is it dative, is it accusative? But the gender will always be neuter, and the number singular. Most infinitives either end with epsilon iota nu, or which is ein, or alpha iota, which is I. Fact is, I think that all of the forms basically end with ein or I, but sometimes you'll have contractions that take place depending on what kind of word you're tacking that onto, and so then you can end up with some other things. But if you can remember ein and I, you're going to find identifying infinitives to be much easier. The infinitive has three tenses, and like the participle, tense is all about the type of action, and so it's the same three tenses because we're going to have continual action, undefined action, and perfective action, so it's just like the participle. So we have, if we want to try to convey this continual action with the present, we could say to continually study. That kind of splits the infinitive in English. That was one of the old Star Trek, well, even the next generation, they said, to boldly go where no man has gone before, or where no one, to boldly go where no one has gone before. That's a split infinitive. They put boldly in between the two, and it should have been to go boldly, not to boldly go. But anyway, splitting the infinitive with continually, you can kind of convey that present tense continuous action. Aorist are just undefined action, to study, and then perfective action, to have studied. Trying to convey that completed action with an ongoing state. The nuance of action is usually difficult and sometimes almost impossible to translate into good English. So again, this is another place where if you know Greek, you have some insights into Greek, you can learn a little bit more and find that there's nuances in the text that are difficult for the English translators to actually convey. Again, time when is not an issue because an infinitive is not in the indicative mood. It's not even a mood at all. It's a verbal noun. So it's not. So time when isn't a part of it. The voice can be active or passive or middle. Some infinitive examples. No one is able, two lords to serve. So here's the infinitive. There's ein, so we recognize ein, that this is an infinitive, to serve. And this is actually called a complementary, because able, no one is able, that's a verb that able to do what? It doesn't stand all by itself. If it was something else, no one, ate, no one ran, no one swam, no one, those verbs, they tell you what you need to know. But this is one of them that is not able, able is not able to tell you. You have to have something else. It's a complementary infinitive. It complements this to tell you what they're not able. No one is able to serve two lords. Okay? Or you could say continue to serve, because this is a present participle, present infinitive rather, present infinitive, and so it's a continual action, and that's true. Working on a job, you have two managers, two supervisors, and one says, I want you to work on this, so you start working on that, and the other one comes by and says, I don't want you working on that, you need to work on this is a higher priority. Well, the other guy told me to work on this. Well, you need to work on that. You just can't do it. You can't continually do it. Anyway, in the same way with this, you can't serve God and money. All right, then that's an example of a present infinitive, and then an aorist infinitive in Matthew 1:20. We have what we saw in the past, where it is an aorist subjunctive. That means don't even start fearing. This is phobē. You see phobē, and you might think of phobia or something like that. That's a word that we derive for fear. So don't even start fearing. Fearing what? To, there's the infinitive. We see the ein. To take Mary for the wife of you, or as the wife of you, as your wife. So it's undefined action. So we have a bonus in there with this aorist subjunctive. Don't even start fearing to take Mary, but to take is the infinitive. Well, I wonder what happened. There we go. It wasn't advancing for me. A little bit of a lag there. So then a perfect, we looked at present and aorist, and so a perfect example. It's kind of a complex, or a little bit more difficult here. This word is kind of acting like the subject. He, to have done, or to had done. This goes with the sign, and so that they heard. So they heard this, him to have done the sign. That doesn't really make good English, but they heard him to have done this sign. That might go a little bit better. Or they heard that he had done this sign. And had done, that's what we have done here in the New King James, because they heard that he had done this sign. Had done shows us that this is the perfect. We have reduplication, which I know is redundant. It should just be duplication, but they call it reduplication. We have this reduplication of the pay here, and not pay. Pay is, I'm sorry, that's Hebrew. The P. We have the reduplication, and we also have the kappa here, and those are telltale signs of a perfect. So anyway, he had done. Okay, that kind of gives us a little bit of feel for that. It doesn't really tell us that that was an infinitive, but it does give us the perfective action in this particular instance. All right, and that's all we're going to talk about on them. We're doing okay here on time. So let's go ahead and read. And yes, we're still doing the first 9 verses of John, but what I'm hoping is that everybody's getting used to the feel, the pronunciation, noticing the accent marks, accenting the correct syllable, that sort of thing. So we'll run through these again. En, arche, ein, ha, logos. Kai, ha, logos, ein, pros, ton, theon, kai, theos, ein, ha, logos. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Hutos, ein, en, arche, pros, ton, theon. This one, he was in the beginning with God. Verse 3, panta, di, autu, agenata, kai, choris, autu, agenata, ude, hen, ha, geganen. All through him came to be, and without him came to be not one which came to be, had come to be. This is there we have that reduplication again, with the gamma there and the gamma there. And so we want to try to convey this as a completed action, so with an ongoing effect. So, and without him came to be not one which has come to be. Make sense? Verse 4, en, auto, zoe, ein, kai, he, zoe, ein, ta, phos, ton, anthropon. In him life was, and the life was the light of men. That's plural, the own endings. Verse 5, kai, ta, phos, en, te, skatia, phine, kai, he, skatia, auta, katelaben. Let's see, and the light in the darkness he shines, and the darkness him not he overcame or comprehended. Verse 6, agenata, anthropos, Apostalmenos, all right. Para, theou, anima, auto, ioannes. There came to be, unlike all the wases, the ains that we've been seeing all along, there came to be a man having been sent. There's the men morpheme. That's one of the things that we look for to identify participles. So there came to be a man having been sent from God, a name to him, John. His name was John. Verse 7, Hutos, Eilthan, Ace, Marturion, Hina, Marturese, Peri, Tu, Photos, Hina, Pontes, Pistusosen, De, Autu. This one, he came for a witness. In order that, and we have the subjunctive, we have the lengthened vowel, he might bear witness concerning the light, in order that all, and here we have another subjunctive, we have the lengthened vowel, all might believe through him. Verse 8, uk, ein, akenos, ta, phos, al, hina, marturese, peri, tu, photos. Not that one, he was the light, meaning the one who became. But we're missing an alpha here. That's why we have this apostrophe. Says Allah, we just have all. So, but in order that, and then we have the subjunctive again, the lengthened vowel, in order that he might bear witness concerning the light. Verse 9, ein, ta, phos, ta, alethanon, ha, photidze, panta, anthropon, erchamenon, ace, ton, cosmon. Okay, the light, the true. That's the typical adjective thing that we looked at, the true light. The true light which shines, he shines, or enlightens, he enlightens every man. He was coming into the world. Okay. Now we're going to do insights, and we're going to continue looking at verbs, and we'll look at some verbal insights next week, because verbs, this is such a big thing. We spent 1 week on it, looked at tenses, and there's all kinds of insights that we can get from the tenses and from the way verbs are used. And we looked at the different moods. We have the indicative, subjunctive, optative, and imperative. And so I want to look at some imperatives this time. We'll look at verbs then. And then after we do a few of these, then I'll go ahead and jump back and we'll look at infinitives and then end up with participles again. Because we have something called third person. We don't have them in English. Third person imperatives. Usually an imperative is you're just talking directly to somebody. Close the door. Who's supposed to close the door? You. It's usually, like going to be a second person singular or a second person plural. You all close the door. We're directing it to generally, in English, we're going to look at it that way. But Greek doesn't have to be that way. It can be first person, we or us, I or we. Or it can be third person, he, she, it, they. All of these can have imperatives in Greek. And so a lot of times English translation will use this word let him if it's a third person, or if it's a first person, they'll say let us. Those are all the salad passages, the let us passages. And there's not every time that it says let us is going to be a first person imperative. There are other ways of doing that too, using the subjunctive. So you had to take a look at it to see which ones, but I've got some examples here of the imperatives. And so most of them we look at, well, all of them we look at this evening are going to be of this imperative nature, let us. So, but in English we can say let us or let him And it sounds permissive, like, you should, or we're allowing you to, or we're suggesting, or something like that. But in Greek, it's heavier than that. It's not permissive. It's not suggestive. It's a command. It is still an imperative. It's still a command. And so, while it can be confused as permissive in English, in Greek you don't see that. The force of the mood is more of the must, we must, he must, we must. James 1:5, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God. This should not be understood as permission. Well, if you lack wisdom, maybe you should, or we suggest that you do, or you have permission to, or that's not the way it reads in Greek. It says, if any of you lacks wisdom, he must ask of God. It's right here. He must ask. And if any one of you lacks wisdom, Sophias, if you remember, like philosophy, that's a lover of wisdom. So the sophos. So we have Sophias there. If any of you lacks wisdom, he must ask. It's an imperative. Lacking wisdom in the midst of trials does not give one the option, but rather the obligation to ask for wisdom. 1 Timothy 4:12, let no one despise your youth. Well, who's being commanded here? Is he telling Timothy, don't you let somebody do this to you? Or is it something else? And it's something else. He's commanding others not to despise his youth. He says, and not one of you, the youth, he must not despise. So he must not despise. Not just let him not despise. He must not despise. It's a command to anybody regarding their attitude towards Timothy. From the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:31 and 37, New King James says, let him give her, if a man was going to divorce, it was the law said, let him give her certificate of divorce. He must. It's a third person imperative. He must give her. If he's going to divorce her, he must give her certificate of divorce. Jesus doesn't want us divorcing. God doesn't want us divorcing at all. But he must, not let him. New King James says, let your yes be yes and your no, no. For whatever's more of these is from the evil one. But to convey that, the force of it in Greek, but your word, it must be yes, yes, or no, no. Matthew 11:15, he who has ears to hear, he must hear. Let him hear, he must hear. This is again a third person imperative. Matthew 16:24, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Let him, he must. This isn't permission. It's not a suggestion. It's not an allowance. He must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Romans 14:5. One person esteems one day above another, another esteems every day alike. Let each be fully convinced in his own mind. Each man must be fully convinced in his own mind. 1 Corinthians 1:31, that, as it is written, he who glories, let him glory in the Lord. He who glories, he must glory in the Lord. These are all, see how these are all stronger in Greek. Ephesians 5:33, nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his wife as himself, and let the wife see to it that she respects her husband. Nevertheless, he must, each one of you must love his wife as himself. 1 Timothy 3:10, deacons, but let these also be tested, then let them serve as deacons. They must be tested. This is an imperative. They must be tested first, then let them serve as deacons. 1 Timothy 5:16, if any believing man or woman has a widow, let them relieve them. And do not let them be let the church be burdened. If a believing man or woman has widows in the family, they must relieve them and not let the church be burdened. Let the elders who rule well be counted worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in the word and doctrine. The elders who rule well must be counted worthy of double honor. See, these are all stronger in Greek than what we would understand them to be in English. Hebrews 1:6. But when he again brings the firstborn into the world, he says, let all the angels of God worship him. All the angels of God must worship him. Hebrews 13:1. Let brotherly love continue. Brotherly love must continue. Again, in Revelation, we have this a number of times, at least 7 in chapters 2 and 3. He who has an ear, he must hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So, as I said, we'll have more insights from verbs next week, but we're going to move on to infinitives and participles. Infinitives. In Philippians 1:21, we looked at this a little bit ago. For to me to live, there's the infinitive. We've got an article, and it's also neuter singular. For me to live is Christ, and to die, gain. All right. For me to live, so we have to live and to die. Both of those are infinitives. The first one is a present infinitive. The second one is an aorist infinitive. The first, to live, means continual. Okay, so when I said present, it means continual action. To live, day after day, is for Jesus. To die, that might happen that fast. It might happen over a length of time. The time is not defined. We don't know. So, to live for Christ continually is what we're talking about. To die is gain. The translation is good, but in English you don't see the type of action. Continually live for Jesus. When death happens, the transition is undefined, but being in the presence of Jesus is gain. So that's good. That's a case where you have both a present and an aorist in one sentence, both infinitives. Matthew 18:18. Some things that perhaps get misunderstood by some. Jesus talking to his disciples. This is all of his disciples in chapter 18. I say to you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Wow, what kind of authority Jesus gave his disciples. That was amazing. Except what we're looking at here is a couple of participles right here and right here. He says, Amen, or truly, I say to you, as many as, or whoever he may, or you may forgive. This is a subjunctive. We got the lengthened vowel there, and this is second person plural ending. And so as many as you may bind, and as many ever as you may bind upon the earth, it will be, here's the reduplication, it'll be having been bound in heaven. And however many ever you may loose, this is a subjunctive again, lengthened vowel, upon the earth, it will be having been loosed in heaven. Okay, so we have this future, we get this sigma here, so we know this is the future. It will be, but then we have a perfective here and a perfective here. Completed action with ongoing effect. It will be having been bound, completed action with ongoing effect in heaven. You do it on earth, that it will be having been bound in heaven. You loose it on earth, but it will be having been loosed in heaven. See, it's what we have is a promise of divine guidance more than it is of authority and power to bind and loose on earth. Well, what about with Peter? Because Jesus said something similar in chapter 16, and he was only talking to Peter, not to the second person plural group of them. And it's exactly the same. Here's the sigma. This is a future. And here's the reduplication. We see the de here. And so it will be having been bound in the heavens. If you, whatever you may bind, and even this here, this is still a subjunctive. Whatever having you may bind, whatever you may bind upon the earth will be having been bound in the heavens, and whatever you may loose upon the earth, there's the sigma, it will be, there's the reduplication, lelu, it will be having been loosed in the heavens, exactly the same thing. So it's not a promise of a power and authority given as much as it is of divine guidance, that the things established in heaven and what they bind and loose on earth will be in harmony. They'll be guided in that. 2 Corinthians 3:18. This is an interesting one too. But we all, with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as by the Spirit of the Lord. And so what we have here are, we have a perfect passive participle. We see the reduplication here. So we have a perfect passive participle. We have the men, morphine, I mentioned that earlier, that identifies as a participle. So we we all, having been unveiled, face, having been unveiled. So that's a completed action and an ongoing effect. The veil was removed. The veil is still removed. So we have this unveiled face, and then we're beholding. This is a present participle. We don't see reduplication in here anywhere. We do see the men right there. And so this is a present participle. So it's referring to continually gazing, continually beholding as in a mirror. The glory of the Lord. Into the same image, we are being changed. And we have a present passive, first person plural. That's the metha there. That's the first person plural. Metamorph. That's where we get the metamorphosis. See that? Metamorph-metha. So we are being, since this is present, this is going to be continual action. We are being changed from glory into glory, just as from the Lord, the Spirit of the Lord. So, let's try to unpack this a little bit. So we have the perfect participle, and the participle doesn't have time on its own. However, it is time relative to the verb. Okay? So, what is 2 Corinthians 3:18 saying? How can we continually behold or gaze in a mirror of the glory of the Lord? Well, that reflection is His Word. That's how He has revealed Himself. It's through His Word. That's where we see Him, and that's where His glory is revealed. This is linked to the present verb, which is continually being changed. Continually is the action of the verb. It's present. So being changed is something that's continually going on. We're continually being changed, the image of Christ. Since the action of the Greek participle is relative to the time of the verb, the transformation, continually being changed, keeps pace with the beholding. See? So as we behold the glory of God, then we are being changed. We are being changed into the image of Christ by continuing to behold the glory of the Lord. So if someone is not growing or they're stuck in sin, I have to ask, how much time are you spending in the Word? How much time are you spending gazing at His glory? How much of His Word have you read? Have you read all the New Testament yet? How many times have you read through the New Testament? Have you read through the whole Scripture? And then as you read, also pray, asking the Holy Spirit to open your eyes to behold wonderful things in His Word. That's modeled for us in Psalm 119:18. So, study the Bible in order to know Him better, behold His glory, love Him more, walk in His ways, be conformed or transformed into the image of His Son. And we learn Greek to better understand His Word and better communicate what God has said to others, better understand, know Him better, love Him more, walk in His ways, be conformed to His image of His Son. Look how far you've come. You know the Greek alphabet, you know the pronunciation rules, you can read the text, you can look up words in the lexicon, you just have to go through, and you might have to repeat the alphabet to remember what the sequence is, but you can go forward and backward and figure that out. You can look those things up. We've reviewed all the major parts of speech that we're going to look at in English, how we use them in English. We've seen how Greek uses a inflection in all these cases, almost all these cases, not so much in prepositions, although it does use the inflected nouns to tell us how we should understand that preposition. It's still important there, even though the prepositions themselves are not inflected. But we've seen that Greek is a highly inflected language, and that the words change forms to tell you how they're being used. You've seen the use of this inflection. Because of the inflection, there's great flexibility in how they do things in Greek, and so this gives room for nuance and precision and emphasis. And you've seen insights that are emphasis, things that are not easily seen in English translation. Now, after having gone through this much of the course, if you wanted to take Greek and learn Greek, it doesn't matter whether you take the inductive method like we're using on Monday nights for the Dobson grammar, or whether you use a deductive method like the Mounts grammar, which is what I was taught 40 years ago to do, the deductive method. Whichever way you go, you'll be able to hit the ground running. You'll be ready to jump in and have a good start, a good platform from which to go into continuing, if you decide to continue to learn Greek. So, any questions from today or previous? Okay. There were some. Somebody asked, how do you greet someone in Greek? The formal answer is chairein. Now you notice this, we see the ain, and sure enough, this is an infinitive. So it means to rejoice, or to be glad. And this is used in the Bible 7 times, and I've got them listed here for you. That's a present active infinitive, and it's just to rejoice. That's the formal way. If you're being, other languages have formal. English, I don't know if we have so much of that, but we'd probably include a word like sir or something, I suppose, if we wanted to try to add formality. Well, here we go. The more formal greeting in English would probably be hello. The informal would be hi. Right? We can look at it that way. And so the same way in Greek, you have the formal chairein, but then there's also the informal chaira. And this is used in a number of places in the New Testament as well. Gabriel came to Mary, and a lot of people look at, like the old King James says, Hail Mary, and like this angel is giving her some kind of honor or worshiping her in some way, shape, or form, and that's not it. He basically is using the informal greeting. He said, hi. There's really not much else behind it. It's the informal greeting. So Gabriel said that to Mary in Luke 1:28. Judas, when he kissed Jesus to betray him, he came up, hi, teacher, or hi, rabbi. It was an informal greeting. And the soldiers, when they were mocking Jesus in John 19:3, and they did, again, I think the old King James probably says, Hail, King of the Jews, when they said, hi, King of the Jews. It was informal greeting. And it's actually an imperative. You're telling them to rejoice, which is really not so much with Gabriel and Mary, but even with Judas, and then the soldiers mocking Jesus, and it's an imperative. You're telling to rejoice, and this is when they were mocking him and everything. It's really a paradox. And then there's a bonus here. Pu estin lutron. It's important to know if you're going to go back in the Wayback Machine. That was the old Rocky and Bullwinkle, Peabody, Sherman thing, the Wayback Machine. If you went back 2,000 years to time when people spoke Koine Greek, you could say Pu estin lutron, and you'd be asking, where's the bathroom? Very important to know that. I suspect there's probably something similar to that in modern Greek, but it may be pronounced differently. I haven't really researched that out. I don't speak Greek, I read it. So, why so much time talking about grammar? The purpose of this class is to help you to understand how the Koine Greek language works. So we've compared it how English grammar works. We've reviewed English grammar. We've seen how English works, and then we've compared how Greek works, and we've seen, in my opinion, we've seen time after time in every instance that the Koine Greek grammar excels the Greek grammar when it comes to flexibility and to nuance and to precision and emphasis. I think it's won on every single point. And the fact is, God has chosen to reveal himself, not in cosmic background, microwave background or whatever. God has chosen to reveal himself through his word. God gave us a book. That book is made out of words. Some of those words are nouns, some of them are pronouns, some of them are adjectives. There's some definite articles in there. There's infinitives, there's participles, there's verbs, there's all these things that we've talked about. They're all in there. This is how God has chosen to reveal himself to us, and how he's revealed his plan of salvation, how he's revealed the gospel to us, how he's revealed what he's like by telling us about Jesus. The greatest revelation of who God is, he said to his disciples, they said, show us the Father and we'll be satisfied. He said, have I been with you this long and you don't know who I am? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. He was the greatest communication of what God is like. In Hebrews chapter 1, it uses a picture in the Greek language that is like a signet ring in a glob of clay. It says that he's the stamped, impressed image of God. You take God, the signet ring of God, and you stamp that into the clay of human flesh. What does it look like? It looks like Jesus. He's the perfect representation of God to us, and that's how God's communicated himself. And he did all this through nouns and verbs and adjectives and infinitives and participles and prepositions. He's used all these things, and that's why these things are important, to accurately understand what he said, because there's people who would twist, wrest. This is nothing new. Paul warned about this. Peter warned about this, and he used Paul as an example. He said people are taking and twisting what Paul said in the same way they take all the other scriptures and twist those too. And so we have to be able to come back and say, this is what God has said. This is the way he said it. This is the way the grammar works. And we can know with precision what it is we believe and why we believe it. So this is why it's important. This is why grammar is important. So all these things need to be considered to understand what God has said. And we want to know that because we want to know him better, love him more, walk in his ways, become more like Jesus. So this lesson, lesson 8, is the last overview of grammar. Homework. Continue to review the alphabet. Make sure you can recognize the capital letters, uppercase letters as well. All the pronunciation things. You can still practice reading. You don't have to just read the first 9 verses of John, but hopefully you're getting kind of the feel for how these things are pronounced. Next week, we're going to be looking at tools, books, apps, websites, and also at translations to answer the question, where do I go from here, to continue to learn and get insights from the Greek New Testament. So that's what we have next week. It'll be the last lesson. No grammar. We'll just be looking at translations and tools. So, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.